So now I will invite all the speakers to take a chair, and if they're ready for questions, let's start taking them from the audience.
A question, but first just a very short comment, and that is to say a tremendous thank you to all of the presenters this afternoon for the work that you've done, because those of us who use IDP at the very, very end of this process, we all depend on all the work that you've done, and a tremendous amount of really talented work and coordination. So we all thank you. This is a little bit off the Lotus Sutra, but a lot of my other work, when I'm not reading the Lotus Sutra, deals with messier texts written on the verso. And so this is really a question about verso material and how you deal with that. And I deal typically with things like donation registers, things that are written in the field when people are jotting things down, or that's one kind of material, and typically it's written on the verso of it's an ugly verso of a text that has a pretty recto. So the front is a nice piece, and it's fallen out of use, and so the back is used to scribble some notes on. That's one kind, and what you think the challenges are for that kind of text. And then the other is kind of the opposite. It's a little scrap of paper on which stuff is jotted down that's then used to patch a nicer scroll. Sometimes the writing is visible and sometimes it's not. So I wonder how you all deal with those kinds of questions.
Who wants to start?
Marie, would you like to say something?
Okay. I'm not sure about the first scroll that you mentioned, the first case, because if it's just dirty, as we mentioned, that's also very valuable as an information. I think you have an element of answer when you said that it was maybe out of use and then they reused it for something else. So we would probably not do anything to it, or maybe just try to, if the text is very obscure and if it's making the paper very brittle, we would maybe surface clean very gently what we can. And for the second example that you gave about those paper repairs, it's really something that interests us very much after seeing so many examples and different versions of that during the project. And it's something that we will probably research. Now we have a bit more time, but we don't have a workflow to deal with research and publish about, and to try to, I guess, make sense and find typologies of types of paper used in those repairs to make more sense of it, I guess.
Thank you.
I might just add, in instances, because I'm not sure if this is what you had in mind, but there's a text present on the scroll in both the recto and the verso, and there are repairs needed, like there are tears or losses, but mostly tears. We would try to apply our repairs from either side in a way that doesn't obscure the text. So we could, for example, insert very, very small repairs in between the characters from either the verso. We normally applied our repairs from the verso, but if this text present, we might apply them from the recto in between the characters so that the text remains unobscured.
Just in terms of imaging, we would treat everything the same. We don't see things as more or less important, so it would be captured in the same way. And as I covered with multispectral imaging, we're trying more and more to develop that and uncover things that are hidden. So that, I suppose, is what we would do.
Just to add that we try to stitch verso as well. In the interest of time, we wanted to stitch every verso, but for some scrolls it's just a blank page, which is it's not a very pleasant process to do that. But whenever we found text, we especially prioritize that scroll to be stitched double-sided. So you will find on IDP that if you click the other side, you will see the scrolled picture of the verso as well.
Thank you. Anyone else for a question? Oh, yes, this.
I have a question which you fleetingly referred to. You had a head-on view of an elaborate knob. My question is, how many original rollers were there in this project? And couldn't we have a side view so that we can see these knobs as like the monk reading that scroll in the murals? And did you have to treat the wood? You have two different materials, presumably, at least, of wood and lacquer, I presume. But I think it's an important part.
I can answer the second part of your question. I had two conservation instances where I had to treat the roller, the historical original roller, and being a paper conservator, I had to consult object conservators. We have someone in our department who did a bachelor's in object conservation, so I collaborated with her and was able to come up with a treatment plan for treating the historical roller, and also through contacts that we have. Conservation is quite a small field. We usually know somebody who knows someone who has done something. So in one instance, I treated a roller with a fish glue. It had split in half, and this was on advice from a wood sculpture conservator. And I had another instance where I treated a roller that was actually more like a reed, and it was splitting on the edges, and for that I used wheat starch paste. And again, I consulted an object conservator for that.
And for me, we've seen many photos of the ends of scrolls, and one or two with a rod inserted. I think it's important to understand that this rod is cut so that the trimmed edge of the scroll, end of the scroll, can be inserted. It's very distinctive. And is it found anywhere else in the world? Is it a purely Chinese way of attaching or making a roller for the scroll?
We uploaded all the images online, so there might be an expert who can answer this question.
I don't think there is a slot on the... Are you talking about a slot so that the paper is fitted into the roller?
Yeah, the paper goes through the wood.
No, that was in the rehousing, wasn't it?
No?
For the original roller, it is attached with an adhesive. The paper is attached, yes.
Not through?
No. The ones that go through are the cardboard cores that we make, where we put the original roller inside a slit in the tube, so then we can neatly wrap it around the core. But the originals are never cut. The paper was originally pasted onto the roller.
And a final question. Have any of you wondered why you have these extreme dimensions for the scrolls?
The reason behind it? Of ranging from fragments to long scrolls?
Yeah.
I
By
mean,
extreme, I mean, you have 7, 8, 13-meter long
Yeah.
scrolls? Why?
I think that's partly the reason of doing this digitization project, because then we can showcase the whole of the Dunhuang Library cave was in the cave, and then I guess some hypothesis might draw from having a fuller picture of what was in the cave and how many items were in fragments, or how many are in long form scrolls, and their placement. I think is very rich research direction.
Well, to save your blushes, I think I have the answer to this question. And I'm anxious to publish it before I kick the bucket. I think it is due to the fact that silk comes before paper. And silk in China is incredibly fine fiber, so that when you set the loom up, you have to make a warp. And this is done in sections, gathering together, say, 100 filaments at a time, so that you put those on the warping beam. And once you have done that, and it may take quite a long time to do it, because they've all got to go through the heddles as well, you can start weaving, and you can weave for all year without having to go through this laborious process again. The reason is that in every centimeter of the warp, you may have 70, 80 threads. So the looms are very small. And fairly recently, 4 looms were discovered in Zhejiang. 4 Han Dynasty looms were discovered. They were, largest one was 30 centimeters wide. So you have that figure in mind, and before paper, silk was the writing material, and it is because of that the paper was made in the same size. It became natural to do that without asking yourselves the question of why. But in the end, it affects both horizontal hang scrolls and hanging scrolls, and it's a unique feature of East Asian pictorial art and documents.
Thank you, Professor Whitfield. I think you also mentioned whether the finials on the rollers were captured, and that's something Tran could add to, but we do try to have
I think
object
they
images.
have a very distinctive shape, like a little trumpet
So
shape, and this is an important feature to...
Yeah, so we sorry to interrupt, but we do try to capture and make that available on online as well, so that that can lead on to further research. Thank you. I think we have another question. First from 2 more questions, but firstly.
Well, thank you for a very interesting discussion. I had 2 simple questions. So one was about the squashed bug, which you said had been kept because it contributed to the history of the object. I was wondering what a squashed bug could contribute history for. So I don't know if you know that. And I was wondering about the source of the oil. Things are walled up in this cave for centuries, so I'm wondering where the oil has come from.
So I will answer your question about the bag, as that was the scroll that I worked on. Throughout the project and throughout the material, we've seen a lot of different insects, usually remains of insects rather than whole insects practically intact. And we do usually remove those from the surface as they're not part of the scroll as such. And we place them in sample bags that are clearly labeled, and we preserve these for future research. But in this case, because that particular bag was so beautifully preserved, practically intact, it just felt a little bit heartless to take it away from what must have been its home for a very long time. So for that reason, I took the liberty of leaving it on the scroll. It was actually quite well attached, quite well ingrained into the paper. So I was also worried that if I tried removing it, it might pick up a bit of the skin, the paper, and pick a bit of the character with it. But yes, in a way, you're right. We typically do remove those and keep them separately. So this is a bit of an extraordinary circumstance and an unusual decision, I suppose.
The presence of those moth casings and insects on the scrolls, it tells a lot about how they're piled in the caves as well. You might have noticed nowadays in some parks, some, I think they call it hotel for insects, those little nooks created in woods and stacks of branches. And it's exactly what the scrolls were in that cave, really. And we could really see that systematically at the end of the scrolls, where it's the tightest and the snuggliest. That's where the moth casings were. So in a way, insects are part of the history of the scrolls, whether we want it or not.
And to answer the question about the oil, we're not 100% sure, but our theory is the oil staining and the burn damage are potentially the result of using oil lamps at the time before they were sealed. That's what we think anyway.
First of all, I would like to thank very much. Without your conservation, we scholars cannot study text in context properly. So it is a tremendous importance for any researchers to study this. So thank you very much. I wanted to mention two things. Professor Whitfield said at the end of the scroll, whether you have this rod and still intact. In Korea, we have mid-8th century in purple dyed paper, mulberry paper, written in gold, and then at the end of the postscript is in paper, very thick paper, and they discovered very fine wooden rod. And then at the end, because it was so precious one, with crystal, so that you can roll without difficulties. And that was a very interesting discovery. And my simple another question is, perhaps among Dunhuang manuscript I have never seen, but is there any manuscript written on silk? No?
In Paleo collection, definitely.
Yes.
In our collection, we have some silk fragments. I mean, in the Tangut collection, so from Karakoto, from Dunhuang, I can't think of any, but you never know.
Because the conservation method must be different. Yeah. Thank you.
I think it's an extraordinary achievement that you have achieved to take a discrete section of the Stein manuscripts and treat them so that they're good for another 1,000 years. Yes, all right.
Thank you. Thank you. I think there's a few more questions from people in the audience.
You mentioned the removal of debris, from the scrolls, and I wondered what you did with the debris. particularly like a hair, for example. If it was really an ancient hair, then you get a lot of ancient DNA from just one hair. Also dating. So do you make very elaborate distinctions between what is debris in order to be able to tell what to do with it and what others might do with it?
I guess the distinction would be when it's before or after treatment. When it's spotted before we do the treatment, then we would collect them and keep them in sample bags for future analysis. So we've done that a few times. I think Maria might have had some hairs at some point. They've been on her scrolls, if I remember. And it could be brush or, a brush, hair or human, we don't know yet, but we have kept those for future reference. But if it's after treatment, as Isabelle mentioned, that's more likely to be something that we shed from our clothes or just, the natural dust that's happening around us when we work, or even just the fiber of the paper we use.
Thank you, Marie.
There is an issue of contamination.
She can't hear you, so without
Sorry, there's always an issue of contamination. Even before treatment, of course, but even then, it's about not contaminating what is debris on the thing. But I mean, if it's a human hair, you have to stop it being touched by any human hand. Otherwise, you can't get any ancient DNA out of it. So anyway, that's it.
Thank you. I think there's one more question, Hanlin.
Thank you. First of all, I just wanted to say that was a set of absolutely fascinating presentations, so thank you very much for the work as well. So generally you covered the treatment of the historical repairs to the items in terms of sort of the feeling that this was based on a different understanding over time of how best to preserve the items, different scientific understanding of materials, how they're going to change over time, etc. However, there are some relatively modern modifications, such as the sort of ink annotations, stamps, sort of generally cataloguing items that weren't spoken about much. I was hoping that perhaps you could maybe just very briefly speak about the attitude towards those, both in the projects and just sort of how that has changed over time in terms of modifications to the items as opposed to repairs, if that makes sense.
Marie, would you like to say something?
I would like some precision. I'm not sure I understood completely your question. Are you referring to the notes, the shelf mark annotations from Giles or even Stein on the scroll and British Museum stamps? Is that what you're...
Yes.
Yes, with those, from the conservator's approach, well, we can't do anything on it, and we don't want to remove it. That's not our... This is done, and this is irremediable, irreversible anyway. The inks they used, especially the pink and black inks that we see systematically on the scrolls, the handwritten ones, are very sensitive to humidity. So obviously we have to cover them when we work on the section of the scrolls they are written on, so that we don't dilute the ink. And we protect as well the seals, the British Museum seals. I think nowadays, if it was, I mean, we can't redo history, but we wouldn't obviously do such things, I think, nowadays. But now they are part of it anyway.
Yeah, I would also add that we could easily edit them out and remove them, because you could say it's not the item, but it, as Marie said, it's happened. It is now part of the item's history in a way, so we just leave it.
If I can add something from the curatorial perspective, we do keep and record this information. That's part of the enhanced records and descriptions that Tan mentioned earlier, because these notes that were added in the early 20th century tell us a lot about the history of the items. They have a life cycle that will go beyond us, they will survive us. And these notes that were added by Stein's assistant, for instance, they are absolutely crucial to understanding how the collection was, put together, gathered. And likewise, all the Stein site numbers, for instance, which we have painstakingly recorded and will make available on the website. We already know of scholars such as Susan Whitfield, for instance, who are working systematically on them to try to understand the order of the bundles and the manuscripts in Cave 17. So all that is absolutely crucial to understanding the scrolls, but the contents of the cave and how all of that, played a part in the life of Dunhuang. So, yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. Any more questions? I've got one online, which is probably for the conservators, and it was to ask why you use Japan paper for infills rather than Xuan paper.
So we use Japanese paper because it's quite a common material that's used in paper conservation. It's very strong and flexible, but incredibly light as well, and it just works really well in paper conservation.
Presumably, too, you can use a single layer of paper rather than with the Xuan paper. You would have to use 2 layers to get the strength.
So, Xuan paper tends to have shorter fibers than Japanese kozo paper, and for that reason, we can use even if the Japanese the sheet of the Japanese paper that we use is very fine, very thin. Because of that fiber length, it provides enough strength to support our repairs, so we can keep them very thin, very light, very small. So again, we're not overlapping much on the original, and we're not adding more tensions to the scrolls with our repairs. So those are our biggest concerns and I guess factors that we take into account when making these decisions regarding to the materials that we use.
I think there is also the ethic decision of making our repairs very visible. So it's a completely different paper, and this is important, I think, that we choose something that is very suitable for conservation, but very easily noticeable, visually and chemically speaking.
Thank you.
One more question at the back.
Thank you very much. I think it's more a question for Isabelle. I've seen one of the scroll which was quite damaged by water, that long one. It was just one corner. And I think waters had a big impact on the characters. And I wonder if in post-production, maybe not with multispectral imaging, but would you use AI on Photoshop to try to make the characters a bit more clear for researchers, for example?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I would say for this project, it's not really something we've considered, probably time constraints, and just we want to capture the item as is, and generally you wouldn't want to do any modification. You could easily adjust the contrast and play around with tools on Photoshop and maybe make it come out more. It's definitely possible. It's just not something that we've done.
Yeah, for image capture, we try to stay truthful to the item, and then for later on, for the different research purposes, you can certainly use, AI tools or whatever is suitable to enhance the images for different purposes. But for our project, we try to present how the item looks like as they are.
Yeah, it also became, if we had extra time, we could do things like multispectral imaging, which was great, and it was good that we were able to do that, but if there was more time, we would probably do things like that.
Thank you all. I think we've exhausted our speakers with so many questions. Before they leave their chair, Giancarlo, please join them. And I would like everyone to join me in congratulating them for, so many years of hard work and wonderful, this wonderful output that we'll benefit from. So thank you very much, and well done for the amazing work. Giancarlo is our second imaging technician. Sorry for putting you on the spot. And now I will pass over to Luisa for the end notes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I think you would all agree with me that this has been a superb conference, really bringing together so many different perspective approaches and practices, all stemming out from study, investigation, research, thoughts around the Lotus Sutra. So one text and its innumerable translations and versions and editions across Asia has been able now in the 21st century to produce such a wonderful conference. So it is really great that we are at this point. The conference wanted to be a celebration and an acknowledgement of the work of the project team, the conservators, the photographers, project manager, and everyone else involved. I think it's very timely, it's very... it's after that, and it's very timely and important because it is as many of you have said, it has been a collegiate effort from the team to work together. And obviously, this conference, I hope, has given to all of you the opportunity to understand the complexity of conservation and digitization projects. They are very time and resource intensive. They require years in order to be properly assessed, investigated, prepared, and then delivered. And then, as Paulina was saying in your presentation, the future and the sustainability of what has been achieved. So all of this obviously has been possible thanks to the support of the Patient Foundation because it has been also a commitment from their side and to ensure that this team could work over a number of years on this project. And obviously we couldn't have done it without their support, so I would like to extend once again my thanks to the foundation, to their representatives, the team, because they've been working with us very consistently, regularly. And I just also want to remind all of you that we have the pandemic in the middle, and I can assure you that that has been quite challenging. But the team has been incredibly creative, I have to say, because that period was hugely productive in terms of writing, research, preparation of materials, sometimes at home, I think, and really being able to raise visibility about the project, about what this has achieved. And if you go back to Twitter, to blogs and some YouTube, there are many talks, conferences that you can check. So thanks again to the project team. And I thought it was very interesting, as you have seen, and some of you in the audience have raised that we had a project team on the one hand, and then on the other hand, in the audience, the end users, the researchers, the scholars, the professionals who are actually using these materials. So it is a dialogue, as you can see, and it is good to understand each other and really what it means to come up with this project, with the outcome that everyone can use. So obviously, when we will have we already have an IDP website. There are resources, and the outcome will be there, and obviously everything will be published. And I wanted also, therefore, to thank again the organizers of the conference, the thought that has gone into trying to capture the richness and diversity of experiences and approaches. So thanks again, Mélodie. Where are you there? Yeah, for inviting the speakers, thinking about this conference, the content, how it would work together, and working together with Sia, Anastasia Pineskis, and Han Linxier there at the end, with many colleagues at the library, and obviously the project team. So a great achievement, and I'm afraid my closing remarks cannot really give justice of everything that you have seen, because the discussions, the questions have been very rich, I think have led to interesting thoughts. And because of that, I wanted to conclude thinking about the future. You have now seen a project like the Lotus Sutra Conservation and Digitization Project. You have had the chance also to hear about many different perspectives and approaches from the scholarly community and the professional groups and the practitioners who have joined us. And IDP, the International Dunhuang Project, is there. There is an email, idp@bl.uk, and of course you are very welcome to be part of the mailing community, so you can receive updates about activities, projects, conferences, talks. The team is always very happy to hear suggestions and thoughts. We need as much support as possible, and all the talks of this conference will then be uploaded at a certain point, so you will have the chance to see them again. And therefore, I would say, I hope that the conference has been inspiring, enjoyable, and that has opened maybe amongst the audience here, but also people following from home, new thoughts, new ideas, and maybe potential future collaborations and exchanges. So looking at the future, I think there is quite a lot to do, and we are here to hear your thoughts. Thanks again to everyone, to all the speakers, organizers, and the team. And I hope that all of you will be in touch with us in the future. Thank you.